I also know our next speaker very, very well. Sinan Aral is a son of MIT. He's been taking a bit of a time at New York University. We're extremely happy to have him back at the Institute. He's a Fulbright scholar, a Phi Beta Kappa. He's been named one of the world's top 40 business school professors under 40. Only a couple more years for that. His insight comes from working with the tech industry leaders of our time, like Facebook, Yahoo, and Nike. He has degrees from all over the place, including Northwestern, London School of Economics, Harvard, and of course, the Sloan School. He's one of our new shining stars. Sinan Aral will talk about the science of social media influence.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a huge honor to be here today amongst all these amazing people. I'm like a kid in a candy store at these kinds of events because there are so many great ideas. And I'm particularly excited today because of the topic of the conference, which I think is really, as Eric mentioned at lunch, the most pressing set of issues that we will face in the coming decades. And I can say that I'm excited primarily because I feel like we are on the brink of a revolution in our understanding of human behavior at population scale. Okay? And the reason I believe this is because in every one of our pockets right now are devices that are generating data about our behaviors, the way we move through space and time on the planet, the types of things that we're interested in, how many steps Hillary takes in New York City, along with lots of other types of data. This data is incredibly granular. It's time-stamped to the second. And this is the analogous birth of a tool for the social sciences akin to the development of the microscope for the biological sciences or the telescope for physics and cosmology. And although the social sciences have seemed sort of a slow progress in terms of understanding human behavior, we really didn't have the tools until now to make the kind of conclusions that we could make in the next 5 to 10 years. And yesterday at dinner, Andy said that he learns the most when people disagree with him. So I'm going to take this opportunity to quibble a little bit with Andy by completely disagreeing with him. In that I think that the key challenge to this new revolution, our understanding of human behavior, is understanding the causal behavioral mechanisms that drive population-level changes in human behavior. And what types of human behavior am I talking about? I'm talking about what drives groups of people to adopt solar cells or electric cars. What drives people to take an HIV test in large numbers? What drives people to vote, or to commit election violence, or to de-escalate election violence? And if understanding the causal behavioral mechanisms is the key to this revolution in our understanding of human behavior, the solution to that is large-scale experimentation and causal inference in these big data sets that we've been talking about. And Stanley Milgram has done a series of experiments in the 1960s, the esteemed American social psychologist, about our obedience to authority with people who wear lab coats telling us to electrocute people in the other room, or 6 degrees of separation in human social networks. And those experiments were revolutionary in terms of our understanding of human behavior, but they were conducted on small handfuls of individuals. Imagine what would happen if we could conduct an experiment on 250 million people. 2 things I know would happen. First, instead of estimating the average effect of a particular intervention on behavior, we could estimate the distribution of the effects on different portions of the population, the young, the old, women versus men, and so on and so forth. And this would lead, obviously, to personalized social and business policy that's potentially a lot more effective. The second thing that we could do if we could estimate these types of experiments at these types of scale is to find nuanced behavioral explanations for what's going on in the world. So let me give you an example which is around this notion of influence in social media networks. So it's a dramatic understatement to say that there has been an explosion of digital social signals in the last 5 years. These are just some examples of the types of social signals we all get every day from Twitter, from Yelp, what other people think of restaurants we're going to, or books that we're buying, or current news events, links to other types of news, etc. And this comes from our peers and the crowd, and we're constantly bombarded by these types of social signals. This has implications for commerce, what types of things we buy. This is a UK Wired cover story, how your networks are driving what you buy. The implication is that as we like things on Facebook or rate them on Yelp, it spreads the behavior of opinion change to other people that we're connected to through these social media networks. But it's not just about commerce. There's been a debate about whether these types of social signals affect social change. For instance, the Arab Spring or mobilization, social mobilization in other contexts. And the question there is, if I post on Facebook that I'm going out into the square to protest and people should join me, how does that drive other people's propensity to go out into the square and protest? Does that create an upswell of this behavior? Does that drive social mobilization? And so what we do is we mine massive social network data to understand how people influence one another in these social networks at the micro scale, and how that leads to population scale patterns of the diffusion of behaviors through society. And the key question that we have to ask in getting this right is understanding causal behavior change. How one person's opinion or signal changes another person's behavior, opinion, or future action, okay? And so I have this cartoon on my door at my office, which is two friends talking, and one friend says to the other, sorry, Andy, I used to think correlation implied causation. Then I took a statistics class, and now I don't. And the friend says, oh, it sounds like the class helped. And the guy goes, well, maybe, right? Because maybe the guy has an interest in, and therefore a proclivity to understand statistics, and so they select into the statistics class. And if you just look at the average number of people in the class who understand this difference versus the general population, it will be higher. But that won't tell you whether the class is changing that number for them, or whether they are selecting in the class of people who would understand this difference. Now, the reason why this is important is if we don't get this right, we will ask the wrong questions. For instance, is Facebook driving the Greek debt crisis? This is clear in the data, right? The correlation is so profound, right? That's the number of active Facebook users and the Greek debt. I mean, what more evidence do you need? Or, for instance, did the use of the baby name Ava cause the US housing bubble? Another clear example from data. Or my favorite, would M. Night Shyamalan start making good movies again if people bought more newspapers? Again, more clear evidence of the relationship, okay? In network science, this is known as the reflection problem. What it means is that human behaviors tend to cluster in network space and in time. We tend to do the same things at approximately the same time as those we're connected to in our social networks. But the question is, in terms of behavior change spreading through a population, is this because of peer influence or alternative explanations? A good alternative explanation for this correlation in behavior is homophily, which simply means birds of a feather flock together. We tend to make friends with people who are like ourselves, and so we tend to be interested in the same things and do approximately the same things at approximately the same time. So if I was to give you a data set and say, look at the correlation amongst people who do these behaviors all at the same time, you might say, wow, there's tremendous social influence in this network, but an alternative explanation that's equally plausible is that people who want to do the same things at approximately the same time are more likely to become friends. That is homophily. Another great explanation is what's known as confounding factors. And Max Weber had a great quote about this, which is, if you see a crowd of people all put up their umbrellas at the same time, you don't assume that social influence is responsible, right? It's probably a passing shower that's going across the field. But all too often, we take these correlations in the data and we make this mistake. So let me describe a couple of studies that we've done that try to get at this difference and try to tease out exactly why this is so important. So we did a study with Yahoo where we collected a global instant messaging network of 30 million people, detailed demographic and geographic data about those users, comprehensive, detailed, and precise data about their online behaviors and activities, and we combined that with the day-by-day adoption and usage of a personalized news and weather app, information application called Yahoo Go, which had about 500,000 adopters. And what Yahoo wanted to know is, Sinan, tell us when one consumer is influencing another consumer to adopt this app, and separate that from the correlation in the data. So we devised a method which we published, and we applied it to the data, and we first estimated a more naive equation where we were just looking at what the likelihood of adopting the app is as a function of having friends who adopted the app, and this is the curve you see in black. So that first dot indicates that if you adopted the app, if you had a friend who adopted the app 20 days after it was launched, you were 16 times more likely to adopt the app than someone who did not, okay? And we could indicate or assume that that's all influence. But when we applied this statistical method that held homophily and confounding factors constant and tried to estimate influence, this is the influence curve that we got. Dramatically lower than you would expect, and it has implications for real business policy. If you saw the first line, and I was your data scientist, and I brought this graph to you in black, if you were the chief marketing officer, you might say, oh, Sinan, this is great. It seems to me like there's high influence early in the product's life cycle, less so later. Let's do peer-to-peer strategies early on. Maybe we'll give incentives to people to bring their friends to the product or send messages about the product. And later on, we'll just do traditional market segmentation because there's less influence. And if you made that decision, you would be wrong, and we should both be fired. Because influence is constant throughout the life cycle of the product, and it's much less than what you thought it was. We were happy with that study, but we wanted to take the work a little bit farther. So with Facebook, we worked on a concept called viral product design. How can we design products that are more likely to be virally shared? We created an experiment with 1.5 million people in it, where we took a movie application and we divided users who adopted the application into control and experimental group users. And for the experimental group users, we randomly enabled different viral messaging features. The ability to invite your friends and notifications. When you took an action on the app, it told your friends that, hey, Sinan just rated Terminator 2 3 out of 5 stars. On this application, you might be interested. This allows us to observe the adoption and use of the application by friends of the control and experimental group and estimate how these features spread the behavior in the population. What did we find? Personal invitations were about 3 times more effective per message in terms of getting someone to adopt the app. And they nearly doubled the global diffusion of the application in the network. But in fact, it was the passive awareness campaign that had a much bigger effect on total adoption. Why? It seems counterintuitive. Well, although each message was more influential, there were many, many more notifications than personal invitations, and so more adoptions in raw numbers from the passive awareness campaign. And at this point, you're saying, Sinan, you tricked me. First, I thought personal invitations were the way to go. Now I think that notifications are the way to go. But it turns out that invitations create a sticky app. Why? Because when you invite people you care about to join you, local network externalities mean you're more likely to stay with the app. What does that mean in English? It means that when I care about my friend's movie rating on the app and they're producing them more often, I'm more likely to use the app in the future. Harvard Business Review did a nice spread on this where they indicated that what this means is that you will have different strategic implications for one or the other of these features. Passive will get you broad adoption quickly, but not so much engagement. Active will get you smaller number of adopters, but an engaged core user base that's sticky and highly engaged. We extended this work to try and understand who in a network is influential or susceptible to influence by randomizing receipt of the passive notifications, so randomly blocking subsets of them to understand who was influencing whom, because this allows us randomized trials at the individual level of influence and susceptibility to influence. So let me give you an example result. Here is your susceptibility to influence as a function of your relationship status on Facebook, okay? The holdout set here is if you don't report your relationship status. So if you're single, you're more likely to be susceptible to influence than if you don't report your relationship status. If you're in a relationship, you're even more susceptible to peer influence than if you're single. If you're engaged, you're even more susceptible to peer influence than if you're in a relationship. And if you're married, you're not susceptible at all to peer influence, apparently. If you list yourself as "it's complicated," you'll pretty much do anything anyone tells you on Facebook. And I told this, this set of results in an audience. One of my colleagues from Cambridge University, Sanjeev Goyal, was in the audience. And I said, you know, one explanation for this is as you get deeper and deeper into a relationship, right before the point of marriage, there's escalating commitments. The day before my wedding, if my future father-in-law asks me to join an application on Facebook, you better believe I'm going to do it. Afterwards, though, all bets are off. You know, like it's pretty hard to undo and so on. And he said, Sinan, you don't understand, you know? He's like, what happens is when two people get deep into a relationship, they start to blend together and become one and to make decisions together. And he said, let me put it to you this way. I don't do anything without asking my wife first. In all seriousness, this is a small example of one result, but when you put this into a pattern across the entire population, you can learn a lot of important things. This is patterns of influence in network data, where on the top left graph, and I'll just give you two examples, is your influence mapped against your susceptibility across 12 million people on Facebook. What you see is that people who are highly influential are less likely to be susceptible. People who are highly susceptible are less likely to be influential, and there's a trade-off between the two in individuals, within variation in individuals in the population. The bottom one shows your influence and your peers' influence. There's a group of people there that's above average in influence who have friends who are above average in influence. They might be good people to target to spread a behavior in a network. This isn't just about peer-to-peer networks, it's also true of ratings. So I had an experience rating a restaurant in New York called Dojo near NYU, where I went on Yelp and I went to rate the restaurant. I'd just been to the restaurant and it was basically an average restaurant. I was thinking 3 out of 5 stars that I was going to give it. And I went, and there I am on, you can see I'm logged in, and I'm about to rate this restaurant. And right next to where I'm about to make this decision is Char H, waxing poetic, with her 5-star review in bright red. And she's saying, you know, look, the prices here are amazing, fresh and amazing sweet and tartar ginger sauce, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know, she has a point. It was probably better than I thought it was. So I gave it a 4. And then I thought, wait a minute. If everyone is doing that, then is this system aggregating unbiased opinion, or is there some herding behavior going on? So we did an experiment where we manipulated ratings by upvoting and downvoting posts on a website like Reddit, and was published in Science, and here's what we found. That our one-vote manipulation increased the mean score of an item by 25%, which is a huge number from one vote. And this was the behavioral mechanism that underlies this process. This is the likelihood of upvoting after a positive manipulation, so there's positive herding when you see a positive vote before you. And on the negative side, if we negatively manipulated it, it increases your chance of downvoting that item, but that's overwhelmed by what we call a correction effect, your likelihood of voting it up after seeing a negative comment. Why is that? Well, it could be that we're skeptical about negative opinions, but we go along with the positive opinions of others. What does that create? Well, it creates a superstar effect, like Eric discussed at lunch, because positive herding snowballs into rating stardom. In this experiment, you were 30% more likely to exceed a score of 10 if we gave you 1 upvote at the beginning, and that's no small feat because the average score was 1.9. Okay? Negative herding is neutralized by the correction effect, and you don't see the same spiraling downward of opinion on these types of websites. What are the implications? Encourage positive customers to rate early. What does it mean for fraud prevention? Well, Yelp pulls out fraudulent reviews out of these websites, but if a review is fraudulent and has affected all future reviews, if you pull that review out, the bias is already insidious in the system. how can we correct for this? What does this herding behavior mean for sales or stock prices or prediction markets? And we were doing this during the presidential election, the last presidential election. I kept thinking to myself as I was hearing polls come out over the radio of approval ratings, what does this mean for how predictions or opinion polls drive election results rather than predict them? Right now, we're putting the finishing touches on an experiment with 250 million people in it, where we are looking at personalized social advertising, how individuals are moved by other individuals in a network. And this is not just about commerce. We're applying the same science to spreading HIV testing in South Africa. We're working with Nike on how exercise behavior spreads in a population from person to person. I'm a scholar in residence at the New York Times R&D lab, where we're looking at how word of mouth conversations drive consumption of the Times. We're working with Peace Text to understand how social influence can prevent election violence in Kenya, with MTV on voter mobilization. And I believe that this is really the future of effective social policies at population scale. Thank you very much. Very happy to take questions. There's one here. Oh. You okay? Okay. I think it's on.
Yeah. Hi. I see that I understand the data that you're showing. I'm wondering if you seem to find a lot of correlation there, but you are bringing a sort of a priori interpretation to the data. Are there any methodologies that you're using to actually investigate more second-order
Absolutely.
causes?
So really good question. A perfect example is the sort of second-order results in our science paper on the ratings herding that I described, which is we looked at the difference between opinion change and selective turnout. So selective turnout is, well, if I manipulate this rating, a different population of voters will turn out to vote. Everyone's opinions will be the same, but more positive people will turn out to vote, and that will increase the rating on this item. The opposite interpretation or second-order behavioral hypothesis is that this manipulation actually changes people's opinions. And I won't go through the details, but by trying to understand prior voting behavior and populations who either turn out or don't turn out to vote, we could estimate how much of the variance was in the result was due to people changing their opinions and how much was due to selective turnout. It's a perfect example of a second-order behavioral mechanism that you can get at only with these large-scale experiments that have the power to statistical power, not the metaphorical power, to get at these results. Really important question.
Is it on? How do you organize an experiment with these vast numbers of people, 250 million people?
Absolutely. So it requires a productive and collaborative relationship between academia and institutions of various kinds. Okay, so I'll describe the South Africa experiment to you. So there, we're partnering with the Preekelt Foundation, which does research on how mobile can affect health, agriculture, microfinance, and so on. All of the telecoms companies in South Africa, Vodacom, MCN, Cell C, and so on. Clicks pharmacies that conduct the HIV tests. And what we do there is we essentially, Preekelt provides a USSD interface that handles all the messaging from peer to peer. Clicks pharmacies, we've devised a method for having a scratch card. When you go in to take a test, you get a scratch card and a unique identifier. You put that identifier into your phone. So in a privacy-friendly way, you can take advantages of the incentives that are offered by the program. And the cell phone companies donate airtime and please call me messages to get the word out about the experiment, and we collect and analyze all the data on the back end. A key part of this is that none of these institutions could do this experiment on their own. So clicks pharmacy, one thing that Hillary mentioned that I think is really important is that clicks are a bad thing to be measuring. What we're interested in is actual behaviors. So one thing that stumped us in this project was, how do we measure HIV tests, right? The actual act of taking an HIV test, rather than I clicked on the link or I said I was going to take an HIV test. Well, you don't get the incentive until you input that unique identifier into your phone, and then we can connect the entire peer-to-peer messaging data that we've collected with the actual tests that are being taken, which allows us to get this done. That's an example.
Thank you, Sinan.
Thank you, guys.